Good morning. So I was thinking a little bit about um, gaming, preferences, influences. So kind of the old joke is I never met a game I didn't like, and that's true, really. And I certainly uh, have always enjoyed OSRs. Simple, old school OSRs are preferred. But I was thinking about what's transpired in the last few years and what games that I experienced um that I still want to play or that are that work better than for me others. So I was thinking about, for instance, so I like the old Sword and Wizardry Continual Light, White Box, Holmes D&D, Moldvay D&D. And then, OSRs that come along and say, okay, let's keep that structure, let's keep that stuff pretty much there, but let's simplify some things. Basic fantasy, let's throw out some of this stuff that we just don't have to do. But it doesn't abstract the D20 old school formula too much like hacks do, right? So when somebody says, how can you love Sword and Wizardry Continual Light, but not like hacks? Well, hacks to me, especially since discovering In Darkest Warrens, uh, Astounding Interplanetary Adventures. These are games that are quite literally abstracted down to the D6. Very simple, great role play first games. Super simple to teach. Super simple to. They're cheap. I think they're ultimately free. They're one page, and they're obviously very abstract. And somebody would, I guess somebody would ask, well, why would you appreciate a game of that level of abstraction, but not appreciate a hack? Well, because for me, the D20, when somebody says, hey, dude, this is D&D with some extreme modernization methods and ideas and homebrew tweaks, I say, yeah, but when I'm sitting down to think D&D, I'm sitting down to play that D20 formula. There are certain things I'm willing to accept as abstraction because there is a nostalgia effect, right? And the minute we take that D20, we say, hey, we're playing Blue Holmes. I say, oh, I recognize this. This is Holmes made better, I think. But you give me Blue Hack, and I say, this is why abstract it? Why even bother to get out a D20? Why aren't we doing something? Why aren't we doing tiny dungeons, or why aren't we doing something with D6s, or why are we just completely abstracting the D20 formula into a hack? It becomes too simple. I don't say simplistic, but we lose that sense. There's a certain argument that could be made that although D&D is not a simulation based game, there's a remarkable sense that there's just enough things that are simulation, but then plenty that's left abstract enough for us to create, for us to imagine, for us to narrate, for us to be free of certain minutia. But then there's just enough that makes so there's a certain meld there with original D&D where they hit a sweet spot between being a very you could take it literally, it could be a very literal rule a particular game, or you could make some executive decisions, right? You could have some GM fiat. You could make rules where there are no rules, or because there are no rules, we are free to interpret the percentages. There's no rule for this. It's a 25% chance. Go ahead and roll the die 4, roll a 1. That's what you're looking for, Joe. It's a 25% chance that, Joe picks up the D4, rolls, gets a 2. Sorry, Joe, you failed that particular thing that wasn't in the rules. Right, which can be frustrating for players when they want to know the odds, etc. So when I discovered something like Lone Wolf with the D10, then I ultimately found IDW and AIA. I went, holy cow! If we're going to simplify and really abstract, then let's just do it. Let's just get down to the nitty gritty of a simple D6. Let's abstract the snot out of this thing, and let's throw all pretense that we're actually trying to play Dungeons and Dragons tweaked. If not, I'm going to take my favorite OSR that removes some of the trappings I don't like, right? And keeps the things that are important to me, or keeps the things that are nostalgic, or keeps the things that I think make that formula or that particular experience really interesting, right? So for one thing, experience for treasure and killing creatures, never paid any attention to it even as a kid. It's my least favorite thing about old school D&D. It's my least favorite thing about any OSR that adheres to that philosophy that you're going to get XP for these things: defeating bad guys, avoiding bad guys, whatever it is, murdering, avoiding, outsmarting. I don't care what term you use. You're going to get XP for meeting and defeating, and then of course their treasure, right? Getting treasure. All right. Okay. That is by far, it's the thing I like least about Holmes, Moldvay, and other OSRs that still utilize that particular feat. It's a great way to do, I guess, a high score method, right? We harken back to 1980s arcade asteroid. What's your high score in asteroids? Well, 4,500, 455,619 is my high score in asteroids. I mean, maybe that's what XP is supposed to be. We're grading your high score, I guess. I don't know. And there's a game mechanic there, right? I mean, you level up, you get better, you get stronger, you get faster, you get more survivability, right? And you should be taking on more dangerous stuff. But my point is, that's one of those rules that I can throw out. Sword and Wizardry Continuum like nails how we level up, right? To me, right? 2 adventures in, you're going to go up to level 2. 4 adventures in, you're going to go up to level 3. 5 adventures more, you're going to go up. So it's just surviving adventures, you level up. It doesn't matter what you kill or how much treasure you earn. That's a great way to abstract the idea of how we level up, and removing some of the record keeping and that mechanism that drives players to want to just get treasure and kill creatures, right? Sword and Wizardry frees us from those trappings, right? Continual light frees us from those trappings. Okay, so do I hate them? Of course not. And will I utilize them? Sure, I'm going to use them in the white box thing we're going to start this weekend. Okay, so they will get XP for meeting and defeating, and treasure. They're going to get that flavor. They're going to find out what it was like to play old school, right? White box OSR version of D20. So again, but we're free narratively to interpret the combat dice rolls, right? Is this a miss? Was this a block? Was this a parry? Right? We're free to interpret that pass fail D20. They're going to be free to interpret whether what hit points look like to them, right? Again, for me, hit points are very abstract. They are a level of fatigue plus injury, wounds, whatever, right? But the bottom line is they're going to be free to interpret that in their head any way they want. Hopefully, I can, and I always have, try to impart that this is not just hit or miss. It could be a great shield block, etc. But it could for them devolve into a simple D20 roll. I missed, and hopefully I haven't had that problem with this group before, but that's the nature of what can happen with D20. It can fall into this habitual trap of hit, miss, hit, miss, hit, miss. All right, we killed the goblins. Now what? Right, let's loot the bodies. Okay, so I've had people ask me before, why don't you do hacks? You seem to like simple. You seem to like these. Yes, but there's certain mechanisms I don't like. There's certain things that I don't want to add to the simple yet simulation. So when somebody says to me, let's not keep arrows, let's not keep ammunition, I say, I like that. I'm not a big deal. At some point, you're going to find arrows. You're going to make them. You're going to retrieve them. You're going to buy them, or you're going to steal them, or you're going to find them. I'm not concerned about keeping arrows, but I'm also not interested in rolling a d6 every time. And if I happen to roll a 6, I'm out of arrows. That's way too abstracted. No adventuring human being in their right mind will pack their fishing gear to go fishing and fail to put any bait or any lures in their box. They wouldn't randomly open their box and go, damn, I have no bait. It doesn't happen, right? So you're not going to run out of arrows in a surprise. You're going to count your arrows, or you're going to say, uh-oh, I'm going to run out of arrows here. But so can I abstract that idea? Yeah, I can. So it's an interesting thing. I don't know. For me, that's a simple method in which we abstract the narrative logic that you will retrieve arrows. You will maybe make arrows when you're camping, right? Whether you narratively say, I'm going to take some time to make a couple arrows, or I'm going to repair the arrows that I retrieved from the goblins in the last fight. Narratively, don't care. You're going to have ammunition, right? The idea of a tool suddenly breaking, or the idea of a tool suddenly degrading because you happen to roll a 1 when you use the die. It's fine. It works. They're mechanisms that work. They are gaming tools that are clever, but they're not necessarily something I'm interested in. So this is why hacks generally don't work for me, right? And so I like the traditional D20 with a few tweaks or options, whether it was something I homebrewed as a kid or whether it's something that the rules just flat say we're not going to count XP and treasure. If they survive 2 adventures, they go to level 2. If they survive another 4 adventures, they go to level 3. Once you get to level 7, you're capped out, right? Define those rules. I'm okay with an OSR also saying, hey, we're going to redefine how you level, how far you level, etc. But then keep the things that we recognize as Dungeons and Dragons, or I should say old D20, right? Labyrinth Lord Advanced looks a lot like AD&D. It's recognizable. That's what made me want to play it. That's what made me want to go grab Labyrinth Lord and first share it with my friends here, because I instantly recognized it as the game I grew up with. And it had all the things that I knew were there. And it also, with that, had all the baggage of the things I knew I didn't like as a kid. And so I immediately scrubbed Labyrinth Lord to the essential thing I wanted to run for the local group here the first time I came back to tabletop role-playing in 2008, 2009, whatever it was, 2010, I don't remember. 2008, I think I came back to tabletop role-playing. And so I used Labyrinth Lord and I bastardized it like I had always bastardized Moldvayne, right? Advanced Labyrinth Lord we didn't play because I wasn't an AD&D guy. But the point is I recognized it. I recognized it immediately as the game I grew up with. Prior to that, I had never seen an OSR before. I didn't even know retro clones existed until I got my hands on Labyrinth Lord. And so, yeah, I tend toward simple. I tend toward narrative options to explain why I'm not counting arrows. I tend to think if we're going to use light, it has to matter. Therefore, we're going to have to check your torch, or I'm going to have to tick turns for your torch's lifestyle. I like the idea of a torch ultimately dying and going out in a kind of an organic, natural way, as opposed to ticking time, right, on a torch. However, the rules state a torch lasts 6 turns. Very often what I do is I make a die roll every turn to see where their torch is at, and then I'll warn them the torch is getting low, right? But the torch could last 8 turns, the torch could last 4 turns. They don't know, but they'll be cued that your torch is about to go. So I use again a homebrew tweak for torches. Food, I always believe, unless there's a class or the rules for foraging, there's rules for hunting, or there's a class that hunts and forages, and it gives us some semblance of what it takes in the wilderness to survive, they're going to have to eat and drink, and that means they're going to have to supply themselves with rations, and they're going to have to, because I like that. I like the idea that the whole point of why you're adventuring through the wilderness to get to the dungeon is you have to survive that. It's not just a hand wave. However, how do we handle rations and food? How do we handle hunting and foraging? Because inevitably there'll be a guy in the party that says, I'm not going to buy rations, man. I'm going to hunt when I get out there. If there's no rule for it, it's going to be difficult, and it's going to only feed you if you succeed, right? Because the whole point of there being rations on the inventory to buy list is to make you make a tough decision. Do you buy do you buy that quiver of arrows or whatever you're going to try? Do you afford that holy symbol, or do you get your iron rations versus your trail rations, right? Then that requires the GM to track it. It requires the GM to say, okay, iron rations don't spoil, standard rations do, right? At what point? There's no rule for how I spoil their standard rations. And these become argumentative. These become bones of contention, especially if it starts to affect their performance. -1 hit point, gentlemen, you're all starving. Your rations are bad or whatever, right? Because there's no rules for that stuff, right? It's in the fact that it's in the inventory tells you it must mean something, but nowhere in the rules of say Holmes or even Moldvayne's basic book do they describe why you need them. I think D&D 5th edition still makes this mistake, right? You have this item, you have these lists of stuff, and they don't really explain why you ever need it. They're tools like a shovel, right? At what point do the GMs actually say to the players, you don't have a shovel, you're not going to be able to dig this hole? That's why a shovel's in the inventory. You need a shovel to do this thing. Do the tools matter? And I think they do. If they're in the inventory list and they can buy a crowbar, they can buy a shovel, they need to prioritize those things or find those things. If not, why are they in the inventory list? The rules suggest they're going to need these tools, rope, grappling hook to climb, right? Can they climb without it? Yes, but is it more dangerous, harder, whatever? Of course, right? Will a rope and a grappling hook get them 50 feet up? Yep. Without a question. Yep. Simple, right? Without a rope and a grappling hook, we're making some very difficult climbs that if you fail one of those points along your climbing 10 feet, whatever, you're going to fall and suffer 1d6 damage per 10 feet. But they shouldn't stop them from climbing, so to speak, right? But it should make it difficult. So later, again, and I had written Dragon Slayer, which evolved into Dark Age of Man years ago, and it was a D10, very simple. You make a character by choosing 3 points and putting in your 4 attributes. That's a +1 to your D10 roll. When you use that attribute to do a thing, I had a reputation system, and that was it. Rules done. That was that simple, right? Everything else was narrative. You just have to have it in your inventory. Food, we assume you have, unless something happens where you lose your backpack and therefore your food and your water. And narratively, the effect can be a simple -1 to all tests if you haven't eaten or no fresh water, wine, whatever, something to sustain you. But it was all very abstracted and left very much up to the narrative play. And of course, that implies some GM fiat, right? When it's not defined, the GM's going to have to make some stuff up. Well, Dark Age of Man, we keep that very simple, abstracted mechanism. We have applied more rules, obviously, to how the GM can adjudicate and utilize these things so the players aren't totally in the blind and the GM isn't completely arbitrarily controlling game, especially in Dark Age of Man, where we want the GM to be naive. So we really want, there's always going to be GM fiat. There has to be to some degree because it's infinite what players can do or say and what can happen in a world. And there's no way to write rules to cover the infinite possibilities of play. Fiat always exists. It's very difficult to remove it without turning it into a board game where everybody follows a strict card of rules and that's it. Don't do anything outside that card. So if I have a card that says these are the 6 things I can do on my turn, Monopoly is a good example, Risk, whatever. Same with role-playing games. When we get too strict and we say this is what you can do, move sets, let's call them move sets. I think PBTA is really good at this. You're not limited, but you're limited, right? You got to use a move, right? That implies there's constraints upon the game in which hopefully the GM doesn't have to take a whole lot of fiat, but that means the players lose their sense of infinite problem solving, as far as I'm concerned, right? I'm just talking about if the rules are forced to stay within your move set, right? And again, I haven't played PBTA, so I don't know, but I'm making some assumptions that for it to be somewhat controlled, right, it has to fall into these options, right? So meanwhile, if it's in the inventory, it must mean something, yet it's not defined in the rules. So how do we handle that, right? And I think a lot of GMs just hand wave that stuff away or ignore it. I mean, they don't even ask you to use your rations. They don't ask you to light your torch. They don't. I mean, you're playing a game that is quite literally 25% of the game is left off the table, hand waved away. And do we have fun? Yes. Are we having a good time? Yes. Are we partaking in the concept of a character moving through a world, engaging in things? Sure. But we're leaving 75% of the game completely irrelevant, ignored, right? Now, that tells me 2 things. 1, the GM doesn't care, or 2, the GM's overwhelmed, or 3, the GM's not very practiced, or 4, they have no plan of how they handle these variables like torches, food, camping, foraging, right? And if it isn't in the rules and the players aren't saying, hey, on page 42, I can forage 1 or 2, I can get enough food to feed me and 1d6 people. Oh, cool. Go foraging. Well, I rolled a 4. Well, you come back empty-handed, unfortunately, but you got rations, right? That happens all the time. So how much needs to be defined? How much is abstract? How much is ignored? How much is hand-waved? How much is narrative, right? How much is just players imagining and sharing story? And how much of it adds a little bit of simulation, a little bit of, plate mail weighs this much, you fall into the water, GM says, hey, you're going to drown if you don't take off the plate mail. The player says, nowhere in the rules does it say I can't keep my plate mail. And we end up with that. Hopefully you play with people who accept the fact that, yeah, you can't swim in plate mail, right? And inevitably there's going to be the guy who goes, who the hell says I can't? Let's go prove it, Jay. Okay, right. Now we're in a pissing contest. So you make a save, right? Very simple. The rules apply. Save. Make a save versus drowning here, Joe. Right? If you take your plate mail off, I won't make you make a save. But if you keep your plate mail on, Joe, You're gonna have to make a save, you're gonna drown, you're gonna suffer drowning. And so we have mechanisms in place, right? Role play, reaction checks. I've said this a million times. We don't need social mechanisms in the game. We have reaction checks, right? You got a charisma +2, you role play out your conversation with the goblin chief. You have a +2 charisma, make the roll. I'm going to modify the roll plus. You're role playing. So I'm probably going to give you another bonus if you're convincing, right? If not, we can literally say, Joe can say, I'm going to tell the goblin chief to release us now, or he's going to pay the consequences. And I say, that's an intimidation check. What's your charisma? +2, great. I make the roll. Doesn't have to role play it at all. We have a mechanism to just say, and the goblin chief says, oh yeah, he's friendly to that. He says, listen, spare us. Don't send your army back here. As a matter of fact, here's some gold. Get out of here, right? And not only did Joe win it with a mechanism check, he didn't have to get into a serious role play. And I'm not having to come up with this fiat. Do I give Joe a +1 because he just was a convincing argument, right? I like players to role play, but if Joe role plays good and hard, and then I just reduce it to a die check with his +2 charisma, then why is Joe wasting his time role playing? So you've got to give Joe a bonus, right? I wouldn't punish Joe for being a bad role player, right? That would be wrong. But a good role play where he's really making me feel like, that's pretty intimidating. He's just convinced me there's an army 5 miles down the road that will come looking for him. Yeah, but give him a bonus, right? Depending on what he said. And that's where GM Fiat plays an inevitable role, right? Hopefully we have enough rules and mechanisms. So when I say I love OSR and I love simple, bingo. Do I like abstract? Sure. Do I like new mechanisms and new rules that create a greater abstraction, like rolling to run out of food, rolling to run out of arrows, rolling for your torch to die? It makes it random, and it makes it, in a way, fun in the sense that, oh, wow, our torch just went out of our control. Isn't that cool? Versus ticking down and knowing, okay, my torch is going to go. When you're in a dungeon crawl and your life's on the line and it's pitch dark, you're going to want to watch that torch, and you're going to want to have enough you can light another torch, dispose of that one, and go. And if you're dungeon crawling, that should be the routine, because there should be a sense of terror. If you're not careful, you're going to run out of a light source. How deep into this dungeon do you want to be when you run out of torches? We're 3 torches deep, Joe. It's pitch dark in here. None of us can see without these torches. We got 3 torches left. It took us 3 torches to get here. We're going to need 3 torches to get out, Joe. I think we turn around. And hopefully that's a conversation the party members are having about how are they going to keep going if they run out of light. If we're not paying attention to that, we hand wave that stuff. Where is the sense of trepidation? Where is the fear and loathing of being in a hole in the ground, right? I think those things are important. And so that part should be a little more simulation. Not concerned about their arrows. I'm assuming they're pretty well prepared. And I've yet to ever be in any kind of old school battle where they literally for 40 rounds were just shooting arrows. It just doesn't happen, right? No one has ever run out of arrows, ever, in a D&D game I've ever run. And I mean ever. Counting arrows, never ran out. They retrieve them. We make a silly roll to see if the arrows are broken. We make a silly roll and say, okay, you retrieve, roll 1 die 10. Okay, you got 3 of your 7 arrows this combat back. But they never ran out of arrows, ever. So why are we messing with arrows, right? So you could argue, yes, but you're going to count the time it takes for your torches to go down, but you're not going to count arrows. Experience tells me that, right? Being 50, years old and having played thousands of sessions of old school D20 gaming tells me, yeah, I pretty much hand wave off some arrow ammunition stuff, but I'm not going to hand wave off torches, and I'm not going to hand it with sustenance, food and water. White box has no information on foraging in it that I'm aware of. I have to look it up again. I haven't looked at that portion of the book, Adventuring. There might be a foraging rule in white box. If there's not, and they're out of food, and it's affecting their performance, and they say we're going to spend the entire day to forage for food, right? Then I'll probably say make a 1 or 2 roll on the D6, and all of you who succeed will bring back enough food to feed yourselves at least, right? But they're all going to have to successfully find berries, rabbits, whatever. It's not in the rules, but once I say it, that will become our foraging rule, maybe, right? The problem is the minute we invent foraging rules, hunting rules, fishing rules, we never need rations, right? And I think finding fresh, why have purified food and water if they never need to eat food and water? So we got a whole spell in the game that would be an interesting problem for them when they're starving and they're dehydrated and they find an old fountain, and Joe says, "Hey, let me meditate, and I'm going to check to see if this food is safe to drink." Right? We just eliminate a whole piece of the game, right? And again, only 25% of the game is being used. It seems to me 90% of the time when I am a player in those games. And in the past, when I've run simple games, I tend to do the same. I tend to hand wave stuff. Well, that's changed for me. If I want to be in a situation where we aren't worried about that, I'm playing IDW, I'm playing AIA, I'm playing a game system that literally doesn't care whether you're eating or drinking. We're assuming you're eating and drinking. So anyway, I thought I'd talk about this because, of course, I'm famous for. I love the hobby, and I love games. I have preferences, and I have games that when I say I love them, yeah, I like them, I love them. But then I have those games that I play and I go back to time and time again, and that's what I really measure as favorites. But I rarely will make a video review of a game or a game book or a game system and rip it. I will tell you the truth about it, and I'll tell you whether it works for me or whether I like it. But I rarely am going to find fault with people's work, especially independent publishers who have gone out of their way to try to make a game. Now, I have said before, derivative OSR work, it just becomes a glut of OSRs that are derivative, and somebody just puts a new name on it, drops it out there, and they want to publish their own homebrew rules, and good for them, they can. So very often I just don't talk about those games, or I don't bother to buy those games. And once I find the one, Sword and Wizardry, I still own the complete rules of Sword and Wizardry. I own Sword and Wizardry White Box. I mean, I own White Box, fantastic. A couple of other OSRs I thought are very unique, like Épée et Sorcellerie, right? Swords and Sorcery, the French version uses 2d6 instead of a d20. It's a great OSR that's completely different, but it looks and sounds, it walks, talks a lot like old D&D with some very interesting tweaks, and it uses 2d6, which is fantastic. So that's an interesting version of an OSR, right? And then of course I have hacks. I have the white hacks. I have the blue hack. I've got Golgotha, which is basically a sci-fi hack. I've got so they're all in a way hacks. I mean, even Romance of the Perilous Lands in a way is a hack, kinda. It's way too simulation. There's way too much detail in Romance for it to be a hack, in my opinion. It's not. There's no abstraction of food. There's no abstraction of ammunition. There's no abstraction of your torch. There's no abstraction of the degradation of your equipment. So I would not call it a hack, right? Those things, in my opinion, those mechanics have to exist for it to be a hack, right? So anyway, I thought I would share this. I look at something like Index Card RPG. For the D20, I think if you want the narrative, fast, simple, super abstracted version of the D20, to me, it's Index Card RPG. It's simple, it's super fast, it's transparent, it's flexible, and it leads to a much more open kind of execution of the mechanical rules, and then we're free to role play our butts off, right? So I think ICRPG would be the best modern D20 simple type version, right? By Runehammer. I think is it Runehammer or is it something different now? So anyway, I just want to talk about this because I am famous for getting a game and loving it and playing it. And some of them I played, some of them I didn't. Some of them I enjoyed, some of them I didn't. But I always come back to the same ones for the most part. So, all right, bye.